my son sent me a message that I never thought I would read in my lifetime. It was short, cold, and final. Please don't come to my wedding. My fiancé doesn't want you there. I stared at my phone for a long time, reading the words again and again, hoping they would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. I didn't cry right away. I didn't respond. I just sat there, in silence, feeling something inside me slowly crack. Instead of arguing, begging, or defending myself, I did something else. I quietly closed his bank accounts. By the next evening, both of them were standing at my front door. Before I tell you how that happened, I want to ask you something. Please stay with me until the end of this story. Like the video if it resonates with you, and tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I read every comment, and it reminds me that stories like mine travel far beyond the pain that creates them. I spent 32 years building a life I was proud of, not just financially, but emotionally. When my husband Robert died suddenly from a heart attack, our son Daniel was only 12 years old. One moment, I had a partner, a future, a shared plan. The next, I was standing in a hospital hallway being told that the man I loved wasn't coming home. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart for long. I had a child who still needed dinner on the table, homework checked, and reassurance that his world wasn't ending, even though mine felt like it had. I worked as a bank manager during the day, managing other people's finances while barely holding my own emotions together. At night, after Daniel went to bed, I did bookkeeping for small local businesses. I learned how to survive on coffee, discipline, and the stubborn refusal to let grief turn into weakness. I promised myself that Daniel would never feel the absence of his father in material ways. Maybe that wasn't perfect parenting, but it was the best I could do at the time. I saved everything I could. I invested carefully. I avoided debt like a disease. I didn't buy luxuries, didn't travel, didn't date seriously. Every extra dollar went into accounts with Daniel's future in mind: college, emergencies, a wedding someday. By the time Daniel graduated with a marketing degree, I had built a comfortable financial foundation. Not wealth, but security. Something I thought we both appreciated. We were close, or at least, I believed we were. Daniel called me every Sunday, not because I asked, but because he wanted to. Holidays were spent together. When he visited, we cooked, laughed, watched old movies. He used to tell people I was his best friend. I never pushed back on that label, even though I knew it wasn't healthy for a mother to replace the rest of her child's world. Still, it made me proud. It made the sacrifices feel worth it. Then he met Vanessa. At first, I was genuinely happy for him. He was 28 and finally serious about someone. When he told me about her, his voice had that excitement I hadn't heard since he got his first real job. When he brought her to dinner about 6 months into their relationship, I tried to be welcoming. I cooked his favorite meal. I wore a nice dress. I asked polite questions. That night I noticed small things, subtle things. Vanessa answered questions that were directed at Daniel. She interrupted him mid-sentence when he talked about his childhood. She corrected him, laughing lightly, as if his own memories needed editing. At one point she said, "You told me your mom just worked at a bank, not that she was a manager. Let's be honest about details." She smiled when she said it, but something about it felt sharp. I told myself I was imagining things. New relationships can be awkward. People perform. I didn't want to be the suspicious mother who looks for flaws where there are none, so I let it go. But the pattern didn't stop. Over the next few months, Daniel's Sunday calls became less frequent. When he did call, Vanessa was always nearby, her voice floating into the conversation. "Is that your mom again?" I'd hear her say. "Didn't you just talk to her?" Sometimes Daniel would sound distracted, rushed, like he was apologizing for even being on the phone. His visits slowed down. When I asked about Thanksgiving, he hesitated before answering. "Vanessa thinks we should start our own traditions," he said carefully. "You understand, right?" I told him I did. I tried to mean it. Then came the engagement. Not in person. Not over a phone call. A text message. A photo of Vanessa's hand with a diamond ring so large I had to sit down when I saw it. "We're engaged. Wedding in 3 months. Details later." 3 months. That was when my unease turned into alarm. Why the rush? Why no conversation? I called immediately. Vanessa answered Daniel's phone. "Oh, hi," she said brightly. "Daniel's in the shower, but yes, we're so excited." She explained they wanted a small ceremony, just close people. I offered to help. I told her I had been saving for Daniel's wedding for years. There was a pause on the line, just long enough to feel deliberate. Then she said, "That's generous, but we want to do this ourselves. It's important to be independent. We're adults." That word again. Adults. As if my support automatically meant control. Over the next 2 months, I was quietly erased from the process. Guest lists were discussed without me. Venues were chosen. Dress shopping happened with Vanessa's mother. Cake tastings, decorations, all of it proceeded as if I didn't exist. When I asked Daniel directly why I wasn't included, he became defensive. He told me I was being controlling, that Vanessa needed space, that they needed to build their life without interference. Controlling. I had asked to see the guest list. 3 weeks before the wedding, my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. My hands were shaking as I read it. "Don't come to my wedding. Vanessa doesn't want you there. She says you've been unsupportive and critical. I need to put my future wife first. Please respect our wishes." I read it over and over, hoping I'd misunderstood. Don't come to my wedding. My only child, the boy I raised alone, uninviting me because a woman he'd known less than a year told him to. I'd tried calling, straight to voicemail. I texted him, asking him to call me. No response. For 2 days, I barely slept. I replayed every interaction with Vanessa, searching for the moment I must have crossed a line. I couldn't find one. I had been polite, careful, even generous. On the third day, sitting alone at my kitchen table with cold coffee and unopened mail, something inside me changed. The hurt hardened into clarity. I picked up my phone and made a call. Within an hour, the joint accounts I had opened for Daniel when he turned 18 were closed. Accounts I had funded. Accounts that still had my name attached. $73,000. Money I had saved for his future. Every cent was transferred back into my personal account. I didn't feel powerful. I felt exhausted. That evening, I sat in my living room surrounded by memories. The same room where Daniel took his first steps, where we celebrated graduations, where he told me about his first job. The photos on the mantel felt accusatory. Had I imagined our closeness? Had I misunderstood my role in his life? No. I knew my son. The Daniel who sent that message wasn't acting freely. He was being influenced, controlled, and I had been too accommodating to see it sooner. So I did what I'd always done. I analyzed. Vanessa had isolated Daniel from me over 8 months. She rushed him into an engagement. She convinced him to uninvite his own mother. And then there was the money. There was always money. I started researching. Vanessa's social media was public. Designer handbags, luxury restaurants, expensive trips, all for someone who called herself a social media consultant. I looked deeper. Her previous relationship was with a wealthy older man who had recently declared bankruptcy. The timeline was tight. She started dating Daniel 2 weeks after his financial collapse. Coincidence stopped feeling believable. Then my phone rang. Someone had tried to access the closed account multiple times. Correct password. IP address traced to downtown Seattle, Vanessa's neighborhood. That was the confirmation I needed. Not suspicion, proof. I contacted my attorney, updated trusts, protected assets, hired a private investigator, and from that moment on, everything I feared began to unfold exactly as the evidence predicted. I called my attorney that same afternoon. Gerald had handled my husband's estate years earlier and knew our family well. When I told him everything, the rushed engagement, the wedding ban, the bank access attempt, he went quiet for a moment. Then he said calmly that I was right to be concerned and that we needed to act quickly. Within hours, we were discussing asset protection, trust language, and contingencies I never imagined needing against my own child's partner. It broke my heart that it had come to this, but instinct told me I was already late, not early. The trust I'd created for Daniel when he was born was still under my control until his 30th birthday. Gerald explained that we could strengthen it, make it irrevocable, and ensure that any inheritance would remain Daniel's separate property regardless of marriage. Even if he married Vanessa, she would have no claim. I told Gerald to proceed immediately, There was no hesitation in my voice. Love for my son didn't mean leaving him vulnerable. That evening, as the sun set and my house filled with shadows, I began thinking in the same systematic way I'd handled financial crises throughout my career. Facts first, emotions later. Vanessa had tried to access money that no longer existed for her. That meant urgency, desperation. People don't move that fast unless they feel a door closing. I opened my laptop and started digging deeper. Vanessa Chen, age 26, employment history vague. Her social media painted a glossy life, luxury hotels, fine dining, brand names, but her resume didn't support it. When I scrolled further back, patterns emerged. Each relationship overlapped with periods of financial stability, and each ended abruptly when that stability disappeared. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing, but the data didn't lie. The next morning, I received a call from the bank again. Someone had attempted to log in repeatedly using Daniel's credentials. The account was closed, but the system logged every attempt. The IP address was traced to the same downtown location. When the banker gently asked whether I knew who might have access to Daniel's passwords, I felt a chill move through me. Daniel hadn't done this. Vanessa had. That was the moment I stopped wondering whether I was overreacting. At Gerald's recommendation, I hired a private investigator named Rachel. She arrived at my house 2 days later with a calm demeanor and professional focus that immediately reassured me. She warned me that what she found might be unpleasant and asked if I was prepared for that. I told her I needed the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it was. She worked fast. Too fast, in hindsight. 2 days later, she called and asked me to come to her office. She said she preferred to show me the results in person. That alone told me everything. When I sat across from her at the conference table, she laid out documents one by one: credit reports, court filings, rental records. Vanessa was drowning in debt, nearly $50,000 in credit cards alone. She'd been evicted from her last apartment just months before meeting Daniel. Then came the most devastating piece. A loan application submitted in Daniel's name for $50,000, denied due to income ratios. The email address and phone number listed belonged to Vanessa. Rachel looked me in the eye and said quietly, "This is fraud." I felt like the room tilted. Fraud wasn't suspicion. It wasn't interpretation. It was a crime. My son was engaged to someone committing crimes in his name. There was more. Rachel showed me correspondence with the wedding venue. Vanessa had told the coordinator she needed to be married before the end of the month, due to inheritance conditions in Daniel's grandmother's will. My mother had been gone for 15 years. There were no such conditions. Vanessa had fabricated them to justify the rush. The picture was suddenly clear. This wasn't a romance. It was a strategy. Rachel urged me to tell Daniel immediately. I tried. He wouldn't answer my calls. He wouldn't respond to my messages. So Gerald drafted a formal letter outlining the concerns and offering to review the evidence together. We sent it certified. Vanessa intercepted it. She called me screaming, accused me of harassment, threatened restraining orders. Her rage told me everything I needed to know. I had touched the core of her plan. From that moment on, I stopped waiting. I severed every remaining financial connection. I removed myself as co-signer from Daniel's lease. I began proceedings to detach my name from his auto loan. I filed a police report documenting the fraudulent loan attempt. Even though the officer explained prosecution would be difficult without Daniel's cooperation, the report created a paper trail. Documentation mattered. That night, my doorbell rang. It was Daniel and Vanessa. Seeing him on my porch felt like oxygen after being underwater. But the relief vanished quickly. Vanessa took control immediately, accusing me of elder abuse, claiming I was sabotaging Daniel's life. I held on to that thought when Vanessa sent another message from an unknown number, threatening restraining orders and lawsuits. I saved it, documented it. Then I went back to my garden and trimmed roses with shaking hands. I reminded myself that manipulators always pushed too hard. Patience was not her strength. 4 days later, an email arrived with the subject line misspelled but obvious: olive branch. Vanessa wrote as if nothing had happened. as if she hadn't screamed threats days earlier. She apologized for misunderstandings, spoke about Daniel being stressed, and offered a solution. $30,000 to cover wedding expenses, a meeting over coffee, a promise of peace. Reading it made my stomach turn. It wasn't reconciliation. It was a cash grab dressed up as maturity. Gerald confirmed what I already knew. Don't respond. Let her show her desperation. 2 days after that, a package arrived by courier. Inside was a thick folder and a handwritten note. Vanessa claimed she and Daniel had met with a financial planner. She included a prenuptial agreement already drafted, asking only for my approval. Gerald read it and shook his head. It was carefully written to look fair while doing the opposite of what it claimed. If Daniel signed it, he would be responsible for her debts, and any inheritance would become marital property within a year. It was a trap built on confidence that I wouldn't read the fine print. I didn't respond, but I didn't stay idle either. The morning of the wedding day arrived quietly, too quietly. At 6 a.m., I was already awake, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee I wasn't drinking. My phone buzzed. It was Rachel, the investigator. She told me Daniel had contacted her directly and asked for help reviewing his bank statements. My heart stopped for a moment. She emailed me copies minutes later. Transfers jumped off the page. Thousands of dollars moving from Daniel's account to one labeled with Vanessa's initials. Dates aligned perfectly with her credit card payment schedules. Daniel had been paying her debts without even realizing it. Rachel told me she was meeting him that morning at a coffee shop downtown. He wanted the truth, clearly laid out. She said something else before hanging up. She thought Daniel was looking for a reason not to go through with the wedding. I got dressed and drove downtown, parking across the street from the cafe. I didn't go inside. I watched through the window as Daniel arrived, looking exhausted, hollowed out. Rachel laid out the documents. I could see his reaction even from a distance. His hands went to his head, his shoulders slumped. They talked for nearly an hour. At one point, Daniel pulled out his phone, scrolled, and showed her something. She nodded grimly. Then his phone rang. I saw his body stiffen. He stood up abruptly, rushed out, and drove away. I followed from a distance, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. He went to his apartment, ran inside, and came back out with suitcases. He dropped one on the sidewalk because his hands were shaking too badly to hold it. My phone buzzed again. Rachel texted that Vanessa had called him screaming about money. He knew now. Daniel didn't drive toward the wedding venue. He drove toward my neighborhood. When I pulled into my driveway, he was already sitting on the front steps with his bags around him, his face buried in his hands. He looked up when he saw me, and the sound he made wasn't words. It was grief breaking open. He told me everything in fragments, about the transfers, about the lies, about overhearing her on the phone saying they would clean out his accounts after the honeymoon, about canceling the wedding from the parking lot of the venue. I didn't say I told you so. I held him. I told him he had been manipulated, not weak, that loving someone didn't make him foolish, that people like Vanessa survive by finding good-hearted people and draining them dry. My phone rang while we were still sitting on the steps. Vanessa, I put it on speaker. She demanded to know where Daniel was. She screamed that I had poisoned him against her. I told her calmly that it was over and that Daniel knew everything. Her voice shifted from rage to panic in seconds. She begged to speak to him. Daniel took the phone and told her it was done. He told her he'd seen the statements, the debt, the lies. When she threatened lawsuits, I told her we had evidence of fraud and identity theft and that further contact would go through our attorney. She hung up. The days that followed were chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Vanessa showed up at my house once, screaming about stolen property. I called the police. She was warned and left. Daniel and I went together to expand the fraud report. With his cooperation, the case moved quickly. Charges were filed. A civil lawsuit followed for the stolen money. We stopped responding to her messages entirely. 6 months later, she was convicted. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read. Prison time, probation, restitution, a permanent restraining order. Daniel didn't look at her when they led her away. He didn't need to. Life slowly returned to something recognizable. Daniel moved back into his apartment after refinancing on his own. He went to therapy. He rebuilt friendships he'd been pushed away from. He apologized to me more times than I could count. And each time I told him the same thing: I never stopped loving you. Not for a second. A year later, he met someone new, someone kind, someone who didn't rush, didn't isolate, didn't control. She asked me questions and listened to the answers. Their wedding was small, peaceful, held in my backyard under the oak tree Daniel used to climb as a boy. When he said his vows, he promised to always listen to the people who loved him and to never confuse control for care. Now, when I look back, I understand something I didn't before. Love isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's firm. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like refusing to surrender to lies even when it costs you everything in the moment. If I had apologized just to keep peace, I would have lost my son anyway. I would have lost him slowly, quietly, watching him be destroyed. If you're listening to this and something feels wrong in your family, trust that feeling. Document everything. Don't let politeness silence you. And never underestimate the strength of a parent who refuses to give up, even when it hurts more than words can explain. Thank you for listening to my story.